Hello, everybody. Once again, it is 9 o'clock Eastern Time. It is time for the 13th Fleet's After Action Report. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. I am Chris. I'm your host, sometimes known as Mr. Frog. We'll go with whatever works for you. So anyway, just want to let you guys know this week. Last week we spent a lot of time with X-Wing, so this week we're going to spend a lot more time with Armada than we did last time. Also, wanted to let you know that there is a tournament going on near Ashland, Kentucky, a place called Flatwoods, Kentucky. The store is called Greater Gaming. I'm going to go into a little bit more about that when I get into the X-Wing portion of the show. Going to keep the introductory notes brief here because I have a guest today. Reuben was my opponent from this past Thursday's Thursday Night Armada. You can go ahead and check out. But anyway, I want to go ahead and welcome Reuben. How you doing today?
Hey man, thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for coming in. Now, Reuben's been playing the game for about 3.5, 4 years now, getting close there.
Yeah, lots of games.
Lots of games getting in, and definitely showing me what the steep learning curve is for Armada.
Oh yeah.
So let's go ahead and first off talk about what our lists were supposed to do on Thursday and how they actually performed. We'll go ahead and start with your Rebel list there.
Sure. So this is an agate list with 134 points of squadrons. It's a variation on the style of list I played through Gen Con 2022, and that list used a Starhawk, and that list has kind of fallen out of the meta now because of how much damage that certain other list archetypes do, and a lot of how players have approached playing against the Starhawk. So after our tournament up in Indianapolis, Garrett and I, Admiral Tater, he's another one of our locals, and you can find him on Etsy, Garrett, Admiral Tater Ship Shop.
Yes,
So,
I highly recommend checking him out because he's got a lot of really cool stuff, accessories for the game.
so this list changes out, moves away from the Starhawk to the MC-75 armored, which is of the two of the MC-75, it's more geared towards supporting squadrons, and it uses a Pelta, which is a ship that you don't typically see in the Rebel Alliance right now, but we're using it in a similar manner of how the Pelta is used in Galactic Republic lists, where it's a projection expert ship and it is a supporting ship. So my list uses the MC-75 with Agate, Walix, local fire control, ordnance pods, LTTs, and point defense ion cannons, and the aspiration title. Now, the aspiration title you don't often see in lists right now. People don't play it that often, but what it allows you to do is it allows you to move shields from two of your locations to two other locations, but you can't regain any shields until none of your arcs are above their printed shield amount. So basically, the MC-75 has 3 shields on its rear, so you can take those shields and put them at the front because you only have one redirect. So putting the shields where you need them to be makes the ship a lot tankier and a lot less reliant on the redirect defense token. The Pelta has the Phoenix Home title, Ahsoka Tano, Ramus Antilles, Intensify Firepower, and Projection Expertise. So what this ship does is whenever it reveals a dial, it gets a matching token of that type. And Ahsoka activates any time, so you pick a ship when it activates within 5 of Ahsoka, and she can change one of its tokens into another token. So this ship is always going to power Intensify Firepower, which allows you to set a die to a face with a hit, and only a hit, and allows you to Projection Experts. And Projection Experts moves shields from your ship to a friendly ship within 5. So you can kind of see here what we're doing is we're making sure that that MC-75 is going to be really, really hard to kill. Finally, the last ship that we have is a GR-75 transport with, let's see here, right off the top of my head, Torn Far, Parts Resupply, and the Bright Hope title. So Parts Resupply, we're giving out engineering tokens because the MC-75 has electronic countermeasures, which I forgot to mention. But it does. It's a great defensive tool. It's really, really important for how the game's played right now. There's a lot of really high damage dice pools that can generate consistent accuracy. So you really want to have that ECMs in your list. So Parts Resupply refills that. Torn Far gives us a blue die reroll on all of our friendly ships or squadrons within distance 3. And we have the Bright Hope title, which makes it really a pain in the butt to kill a relatively points cheap ship. And finally, for squadrons, we have 133 points of squadrons. We have Wedge Antilles, Dutch Vander, Lando Calrissian, Hera Syndulla, and Ghost, 2 YT-2400s, and a VCX. So this is a really common squad ball that we're starting to see out of Rebel play, and it's really, really geared towards winning that squadron war fast, because there's a lot of things in the game. Yeah, and you experienced that.
Yeah, I'm going to point out that on the list that I have up there, I have one mistake there. Instead of Wedge, we have Biggs Darklighter. So yeah, switch Biggs for Wedge there. Now, one question that comes up with this is, a lot of lists will fly more ships than this, and does the lack of activations and deployments really hurt a lot with this list, or?
So that's something I'm really testing with right now, because this list is really not what the established meta of Rebels is. Rebels right now, if you look at their squadron lists that are doing well, that are getting top 8s, getting top 4s at tournaments, you're going to see 2 flotillas, you're going to see the assault frigate, you're going to see 1 small ship, or you're going to see 2 CR-90s and only 1 float, and you're going to have 134 points of squadrons. So this list being a 3 activation list with only 1 flotilla is very different from what we're seeing have consistent success. But what it is pretty close to is when we look at GAR lists, so Galactic Republic lists, where they have a C-70, a Pelta, a Venator, so 3 activations, support ship, buff ship, and your big, large base ship that's going to push all those squadrons. But my list takes that archetype, but doesn't use it to push a whole bunch of bombers. Instead, what it does is it makes this really, really tanky flak boat that will roll forward into the squad ball and into that squadron fight. And if you get in under its umbrella, it's just going to really tilt the squadron engagement very rapidly in your favor with the blue-black flak and the ordnance pods on top of how the Rebel rogues work.
So in a lot of ways, in some of the other games, I would hear this list referred to as a points denial list.
Yes, this is a fortressing list, definitely.
Okay. Now we'll go ahead and let's see if I can call up my list here and talk about that a little bit, because you also had a hand in helping me put this together.
Yeah.
Actually, the entire group that we play with on Thursday had a hand in putting this together. But we do start off with the backbone of it is an Imperial 1-star destroyer with Admiral Sloan on there, Minister Tua, which allows us to get a defensive refit on there. Plus, Minister Tua is good to sacrifice to Vader later on. Boarding Troopers, which I did not understand what they did until I actually got into the game and got to use them that once. And wow, I was getting ready to dump them.
They're good.
Expanded hangar bays, because this fleet is meant to push squadrons, and it's very necessary for this ship to have that. Link turbo laser towers to give you some rerolls in there, and electronic countermeasures in order to get back the tokens that people are focusing out. So not as tanky as your ship, but on the other hand,
No.
it is pretty tanky, especially considering that it's got 11 hull.
You just
Um,
got to know.
yeah. You've got two Gazanti cruisers, one that has Darth Vader, which again is there for dice manipulation, and then comms net so that you can push tokens to your Imperial one to help you push squads or get engineering if you need it. The other Gazanti cruiser gives you a parts resupply so that you can go ahead and do some repair work on the Imperial one as you need it. Maybe on the Raider 2, although the Raider 2 is so squishy that it might not last long enough to really, and doesn't have enough engineering to make great use of that token. But on the other hand, it has Emperor Palpatine on there to try to discourage people from shooting it, because if you shoot it, you're losing tokens. Weapons battery text to manipulate your dice so that you get that crit. And the reason why you want to get that crit is because of the overload pulse. You're trying to use that to shut down all the defenses on one ship so that you can come in on the fighters and strip them after you've had them exhausted there. I shouldn't say waste all of them, but whatever. And then disposable capacitors so that you can get that one shot in from long range to trigger the overload pulse, and then follow in with the fighter squadrons, which you've got 122 points in squadrons. I'll be perfectly honest. I think this is the weakest part of my game, was the squadrons, and I don't think I knew how to make the squadrons work together the way that they were supposed to. So I won't pretend to lay out a great strategy for why the squads were there. You've got Colonel Jindin, which I know is there to allow you to shoot from another fighter a second time, which I generally used with, I believe, Merrick Steele, because he had the best bomber attack, which allowed me to get 2 dice on ships and give me a better chance of getting rid of tokens there. Mauler Mithril. Refresh my memory.
So Mauler Mithril, when he ends his activation, squadrons within distance 1, enemy squadrons within distance 1 of him take 1 damage.
Okay. So yeah, he's giving you some damage without dice, which anybody who has played any strategy game can tell you, any damage you can do without dice is just awesome. Black Squadron is there to force your opponent to attack it because it is an escort. Plus, it's got counter, so while they're shooting you, you're shooting back, which is pretty nice. Saber Squadron is a sniper, so you're trying to take out problematic targets from a distance. Sunter Fell.
Sunter, he's really dependent on your placement of him, because he really likes being in the ball of your squad ball, so that all your counter things around him, like the Black Squadron and TIE Interceptors, that if they shoot a Black Squadron or they're trying to take out Jindin, like those other powerful pieces of your army, fleet and Mauler Mithril, you always get to punish them for doing that. And that's the thing about Imperial squad balls, is that you really kind of want to keep everybody, and squad balls in general, you want to keep them all tucked together, because they've got a lot of interlocking parts that you have to really manage with how you move all your pieces around. It's very technical.
Okay. And then you've got a generic TIE Interceptor Squadron and a TIE Defender Squadron. TIE Defender there is to give you another bomber. Also, they're pretty tough squad ball into the squad ball there. And the Interceptor Squadron, I guess, just another counterattack in there. Probably maybe mess with this just a little bit because I know after the game we discussed wanting to get the title on the Raider 2 Corvus. Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's 2 or 3 points?
I think it's 3.
Okay, so either way, I'm at 399, so I have to free up a few points in order to do that. So I don't know that the only places I looked in the list and thought there was going to be room was maybe Link Turbo Laser Towers. Switch that out for something that might be a little bit
Yeah.
less effective, or play with
It's
the
always a
squad
big
ball.
question.
Yeah.
Because LTT is really helpful. Like, you think it's okay when you reroll the 1 red, and then you're like, man, that 1 ace is at 1 hole. It needs to die. And
Yeah.
then it dies.
But maybe I can find something that will do pretty good with it. But anyway, as far as performance in the game, yeah, I kind of walked right into you, didn't I?
Yeah, it's always kind of the first thing Sloan players like to do, because you get real high on that adrenaline of just turning somebody's tokens into nothing, and you're like, oh man, I can go get them, and then you try and go get them, and a more experienced player will be like, oh yeah, I know, I kind of know what Sloan will do, and if you make a slight mistake into me, I'm really going to punish you for it. And that's a part of the learning the squad war in general, is how you really use your fleet as a combined task force to accomplish your mission. Because you don't want your squadrons running out there out in front of your ships where they're not safe,
Yeah.
because you don't think that 1 damage really matters, but suddenly like 5 of your squadrons take 1 damage, you're like, oh no. Oh, I'm hurt.
Well,
Uh-oh.
and I mean, a lot of my squads, they're 3 damage to them, so 1 damage is pretty big. Yeah.
You're like, oh no. What do I do? So, and
But I definitely overcommitted, and I
Mhm.
also think I chose the wrong initial target.
Yeah. So, welcome to fighting Agate. You either have to really try to kill Agate dead, and you go, okay, my entire game plan is killing this 1 ship, or you go, I'm not going to kill that. We're going to kill everything else. Fine. And that's one of the decisions it's really a decision you have to make in every game of Armada. Really, when you, like, even before deployment, you really want to look at your opponent's fleet and go, like, okay, what can I possibly kill? What do I need to kill to get a good score? So a good score, like if we're practicing for a tournament, we really want to play in tournament conditions. So you really want to look to try and get that 7 or 8, because a 6, like getting a 6 win, okay, well, so in a tournament of Armada, when you score points, you look at how many points you scored off of tokens and objectives, and you look at how many points you scored off of ships you've destroyed. And the differential, so the difference between the number of points I score and my opponent scores, is the number of tournament points that you get out of 11. So if I beat you, but I only beat you by a margin of victory of less than 76, something like that, I only score 6 tournament points and you would score 5. And the overall winner of a tournament of Armada is the person who has the most tournament points. Not win-loss, like in games like Warhammer 40k, where it's win-loss first and then strength of schedule. In Armada, it's tournament points scored before margin of victory. So really, to have a chance to win a tournament of Armada, you're really looking to get 7 or 8 points per game over like 3 or 4 games. So when we look at an opponent's fleet and we judge what can we kill, we're really taking into account, like, okay, how do I get that 7 win? How do I get that 8 win? Because you need like 76 points to get a 7-4 victory. And my list is really focused on winning that squad war very fast. So I was playing double Onager with light squadron coverage, and I played a tournament up in Indianapolis with it. And I played against a lot of Rebel MSU with MC30s and squadrons, but like about 100 points a squadron. And the list I was playing at that time just couldn't kill the squadron. And I played a lot of squadrons. I like rebel squadrons with a large base ship. It's my preferred archetype, and that's really what we came up with. And there's a lot of cases in Armada tournaments and in Armada games where you look at like, okay, how am I getting my points for this victory? Because you can look at an opponent's fleet and you go, okay, well, I can probably kill one of these, probably not two. I can try, I'm definitely advantaged in this particular aspect of our matchup. And then after deployment, you can really look at the map, you can look at how the game and deployment has happened, and you go, okay, my plan from the very beginning of this game is I'm going to eliminate these two pieces of my opponent's fleet, conserve as much of my fleet as I can to get my victory condition, and then disengage. And it's the only way to learn it, and the only way I learned it, was that you really just play very aggressively. And sometimes you're just going to get blown up. But what you learn is okay, now I know when it's time to run. And knowing when it's time to run is probably the most important aspect of learning Armada outside of deployment. Because deployment pretty much determines your entire game, and it's very difficult to learn. It's like, it gives me headaches dealing with deployment and what to do and when to do it and how do you do this thing, especially if you're not solid in the matchup. Like, I don't play against a lot of Rebel MSU because I'm the guy that Rebel MSUs everybody in my play group. So learning how to deal with that particular deployment and then going from deployment, executing a good game, and then knowing when to run, that's like really like mastery of Armada, right, for tournament play. And in casual pickup games, really you should just focus on flying well and then executing your game plan, and don't really worry so much about the score, because really what you want to do is you want to figure out how do I fly my ship, how do I keep my guns on target, how do I use these pieces together, how do I use squadrons well, how do I defend my squadron ball, how do I attack with my squadron ball, how do I move my ships to stay out of arc. It's a lot of really like minute things, because Armada is a game of millimeters in a lot of instances, and it's very fine. And when you get to that point, you can really just, that mastery really shows when you move ships around. They just glide together effortlessly. You don't hit anything. Your fleet just like moves with this synergy, and it just looks really cool on the table too, because it's like in a formation and the squad ball's all there and close air support. And you've got everything all lined up, and random people walk by in the coffee shop and they go, oh, it's so cool looking. Like, yeah, I know it is, isn't it?
I feel like I flew better last time as far as the ships were concerned. I didn't do well, of course, with the squad ball because I was still learning how all that worked. But I think the actual big ships, I think I did a little bit better than I have in the past on that. But it's taken some time, and I've messed around with a few different types of fleets and had difficulty learning how to fly each of them.
Yeah, they each really present an interesting and different challenge of using each ship, because there's large ships, and you think they're ponderous, but when you nav at the right time, they can suddenly just whip their noses right into the right position, and they become very threatening. And then there are small ships, and you're like, well, this thing just seems like it's going to immediately blow up. But if you really measure well and gauge that engagement range, they can be really, really hard to kill, especially when they like attack from the edges instead of like jumping into the middle of things. So yeah, your use of the ISD was much better. So to like give an overview of how our game went, I really put my Pelta as like the target for you, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to use the Pelta as like a block, as an anvil, because it's not that many points, it's about 80, and it's got solid defensive tools available to it to stay alive. So it's going to take you a bit to kill it, and if you do, I'm not going to lose that many points in the grand scheme of things with the 75 to the outside, and my plan with it was to really just like cut through from the outside like this across your fleet to win the squad war first, and then go and kill Flotilla or the Raider, because where the Raider eventually ended up, because you thought a little bit about that one, because you were really kind of unsure of its positioning there. So retrospectively, you may have considered, instead of doing it in alignment where it was pointed at my ship, you can do what's called a drag ship. So the Raider would be in a position where it's like parallel to the board edge, your long board edge, so that when it does that first movement, it kind of just goes to that distance 3 where it would be originally deployed. So it has more space to move.
And I had given that some thought. It just, one of the things that some of the conversations that we've had led me to believe that that may not necessarily be a good idea, because that gives a clear signal to your opponent exactly what you're doing with that the next turn. But on the other hand, the first turn is not your engagement turn, to be perfectly honest. So you can afford to do that. So, but some of the things that you were saying touched on something that I've discovered with a wide variety of games that I've played, and I want to throw that out there as kind of a segue into the next topic here, and that is that every player that comes to a game has their own unique play style, and each of the different fleets have a different play style. So while we may discuss what's good for new players and everything, keep in mind there's no one size fits all for anybody, and it's a good idea to play around with different things to see what it is that speaks to you. But leading into that, I did ask earlier in the week if you could tell me who you think the top 5 commanders would be for newer players, and I think I know what one of them's going to be, but I'm just kind of curious here.
May surprise you.
Yeah, I know Akbar is going to be in there somewhere.
Actually, I thought about Akbar and I decided against it, and I've got a couple of reasons in general why I chose the admirals I chose.
Okay.
So I'm like, when I focus on trying to teach a new player about Armada, I really want to focus on the fundamentals of play. And the fundamentals of play are maneuver and doing the actual mechanical steps of the game well. So when we're talking about mechanical steps of the game, we're like, okay, you choose a ship to activate. You reveal the command dial. You decide whether or not you take a token or the dial effect. You make your shots. When you make your shots, first we check our arc line, then we check our line of sight, then we check range, right? So all the little minute things that go into playing Armada well, that's what I really want to focus on when I'm teaching new players. So really, like, when I was thinking about this earlier today, about what admirals I would really want to suggest a new player to play, I don't really want to suggest admirals that really affect that part of the game. I really want an admiral that kind of hangs back from that, gives a bonus, but doesn't allow a new player to have an out that allows them to make a mistake or get a bad habit because of the admiral that they're playing early in their experience with the game, that then they have to like go back to and go, oh, well, now I have to relearn how to fly because I was so used to having this thing. And Akbar is a really excellent example of that, because when I was starting the game, I flew a lot of Akbar, and I love Akbar. He's really fun. He's a powerful commander. He has really good lines of dialogue that you can pull out when you're at the store. He's just a fun time. But when you're flying him as a new player, like, my mentality of flying him as a new player was, okay, I'm going to move my ships and I'm just going to make a box. And then my opponent will have to fly into my box and I just get to shoot him for free. Hooray! And that's not helpful in the long run learning the game, because when you're playing Akbar, when you're playing Akbar and when you're playing other commanders, you don't want to choose the ground that you fight the battle on. You want to choose the order in which you kill your opponent, as how we like look at our tempo of the game, how we see the game through to conclusion. So when you're flying Akbar, you need to you want to know all the movement. You want to know how to maneuver, when to confire, when to navigate, so that instead of going, oh, well, all my ships go to the right and I make a line and and we toilet bowl you into red dice forever because it's the best thing to do with Akbar. Instead of that, you want to like move aggressively so that you know that when you have an out route to fly away from him, but your opponent has to fly into you and you get a free shot and then fly away. So for Rebel Commander, I would suggest Dodonna because Dodonna doesn't affect any of your dice adding. It doesn't affect your maneuver. He just says, when you deal a face-up damage card, look at the first 4 and choose one. So it's still a powerful effect that's very fun and allows you to build multiple different fleets with them because you can use MC30s, you can use CR90s with turbo laser reroute circuits because they can do crits, not just doubles. And you can use bombers, so you can play any of the major different types of lists with Rebels, but you're not getting into a position like if you say Akbar, where I would have to learn to fly in a way that's always drifting to the right or drifting to the left. Using Dodonna, you can say, okay, well, I can just fly my ships in the way that they can attack, so I can learn how to be aggressive to the maximum so that I eventually know what's too far, so I can learn how to mitigate my natural aggressive instinct to win the game, because you got to kill stuff to win. So you want to learn that part first, and it's more fun to blow stuff up. For Imperials, I chose Mahdi because in the same way, so like Akbar would, he's a good second commander once you get like the fundamentals down, just like I would suggest Jerjerrod as a second good Imperial admiral, but the first one being Mahdi. So when you fly Mahdi, you just get more hull. Really simple, easy to understand, makes your ships tankier. Really fun. So, but he doesn't make you more maneuverable. So you still have to learn the good timings of when to use your nav dials, when to use tokens, when do I engineering. But he gives you a little bit of an out to be like, okay, well, you get 3 extra hull, so even though you got your ISD in a little bit of a bad position, you're not going to get punished as hard. So once you understand that, when you're playing Jerjerrod, you have that really like that double click at the first joint, so you can be really like zippy to the inside. You understand how to use maneuver and Jerjerrod's ability to mitigate the damage you'll take, whereas Mahdi says, you can just kind of fly into him and I'll mitigate the damage for you to an extent. Galactic Republic was a little bit harder because a lot of their admirals are really about doing very specific interaction. And I thought about it, and really you don't want to bog down new players with more interactions on top of what you're already trying to learn. So like Luminara has really specific timings that you need to remember for her to be good. So like you have to go, oh, well, if we've got, if we're playing a regular game of Armada, there's like, for a 16 defense tokens sometimes, kind of like on average. So you have to remember every time you spend one of those, you can look at another one of your ships and refresh that one. And then you have to think about, okay, why do I refresh this one? When this one's attacked, what's the best one to do? Which ship? Like, there's a lot of decisions you have to make that are they're so much built upon just a really strong core understanding of how the game works that you just won't necessarily have as a new player. So I went with Obi-Wan. He's not played that often, but his kit, like what he does, much like Dodonna and much like Mahdi, is just it's simple, it's good, and it can help you get out of trouble. So when he spends a redirect token, he reduces the damage by 1 before you resolve the effect of the defense token. So he's like inbuilt expert shield tech, so he makes your ships just a little bit tankier. So, and then finally we have Grievous. So General Grievous, he's for the Confederate of Independent Systems, and his ability is whenever one of your ships or squadrons is destroyed, refresh a defense token on a ship. So obviously we can see that this one is much more complicated than the other options that I've suggested, because CIS, much like GAR, they have some very technical specific commanders. Like French, he's specifically about if you do this token, you get the dial instead. And I kind of want to stay away from that kind of idea because first you need to really understand the difference between what a token effect is and what a dial effect is, and how many times each ship can get affected by each thing, which is once. So really drilling down how the command stack works and how the dial works is really one of the core parts of Armada, and also is what makes it really feel like you're piloting a ship. Because you're like, all right, crew, like keep this order ready for later. I have to think about how many turns in advance I'm going to do something. I have all these secondary crew members that are prepared. They're ready for when the shields start flickering so that we can regenerate more shields with our engineering token. Or like we've got the crew ready to kick on the engine so our nav token just clicks at that right time. And it makes the ships feel big and it makes them feel like ships instead of like more skirmish-like pieces, like a single individual on a battlefield.
You feel like some of those design choices, as far as the commanders are concerned, has to do with when the Separatists and the Republic pieces came out. Like after people had already experienced the game, so they felt they had to do more complicated commanders for them.
Probably. I mean, I'm not one to. I'll talk a lot about game design as a person that just like enjoys video games, but from a point of like where they were, because we've seen like we have a lot of commanders in Armada that are pretty specifically geared to one ship, and generally that's the ship that they were released with. They tend to like favor it. You really see that in Wave 8, so that's the Onager and the Starhawk wave, and it's like Agate and Ramadi are really bad about being bad, that they're really good on just kind of one ship, where they make one particular archetype stronger. Ramadi is really good on the Onager because of the obstruction, because of how long the Onager shoots, and the Starhawk is kind of like, because it doesn't have a defensive retrofit for how many points you pay for it without Agate giving it that another token, it's like an ISD and a half, and it just doesn't feel like an ISD and a half on the table without Agate giving it that extra token. So I think some of the Clone Wars wave admirals, well, commanders, are really interesting, and they really leverage the uniqueness of those two factions compared to the Civil War factions. So maybe they like maybe they are more powerful, but they're also more interesting in some ways.
Well, I guess the suggestion wasn't actually that they are more powerful. Power level is debatable in so many different levels. I think what I'm saying is just more complicated, more technically motivated, I suppose.
Yeah, Yularen definitely is that because like Yularen repairs squadrons, and there's nothing else in the game that does anything like that.
And then you look at the commanders that came out in the rapid reinforcements, and I'm not really sure that they knew what they were trying to do there, especially when you look at the rebel commander.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about Armada is that you have to like look at each card and go, well, what did they know when it came out? And what has the game become since then? And Garrett was really talking to me about this because I also, some of the rapid reinforcements 2 stuff is obviously not, maybe, not well thought out. But Armada has a metagame, develops pretty slowly. So it takes a couple, it takes some time for people to really like, first of all, come up with how to play a list. And then after it starts winning a bunch of games, then people go, okay, how do I really deal with this? And it like takes a year, because we saw Gar even before Anakin. At Worlds last year, there were only maybe 8 players total out of like 8 that played Gar at worlds. And now we have a bunch of Luminara lists, we have a bunch of Bale lists, we have Anakin, we have Tarkin. Like that was an older version, but we see a lot of different experimentation with that faction with kind of similar lists, but they all kind of split in a different way and specialize on something different. And it really comes down to how technically difficult it is to fly, regardless of what faction you play, just with how the maneuver tool works and how the arc lines work. And that is a very flying well, you can really take that skill and apply it to any faction. And that's kind of like that's the first step, is going like, okay, how do I get my arc of my ship to actually shoot what I want it to shoot? Because it's hard. You have to like look at all the spatial stuff. You have to be like, okay, well, he's going to move here, so I need to move my ship so that when we're in range of each other in 2 whole turns, so a third of the game later, my guns will be shooting at his guns at the right place. And that's hard because we can't back up, we can't put on the e-brake, we can't go to 0 because we can, but then you're like, oh, am I going to get shot? Is this the right time to go to 0? Oh, no, no.
And that maneuver tool has a lot more flexibility than people think it does.
Yeah, it does. And then you're looking at the arc lines, you're getting out your laser pointer, and you're like, well, my arc lines say this, but I'm going to be moving into this big curve, so how do I get my guns to hit what I want to hit? And
still predict what your opponent's going to do.
Yeah, and then they might just like fly the other direction. You're like, what? Dang it. Now how do I get to them? I spent a lot of time, because, it was over the pandemic, so I had too much free time because nobody was doing anything. And I would just sit and have a ISD-2 move at speed 2 just in a straight line. So I could move my CR-90s and move my assault frigate how I needed to move them so that I could keep my guns on target for 2 or 3 turns. And that's a really good drill that I suggest that players in general use, because it really helps you develop that eye for the game, so that you can kind of like, that if somebody moves in this, like in a first, like a preset move that you've moved ships in, you can go, okay, I have a pretty good idea of where that ship's going to end up. So I know generally how I should move because I've practiced it a bunch on my first move to be in the right place that I want to be. But it's not as fun because like you can learn a lot by just playing games. But I'm a proponent of an idea called skipping steps, where you either you take what someone else is doing so that you don't have to think about how do I build a fleet, because that's also really hard because there's a ton of upgrades, special types of things, and unique things. So if I take a list, I'm going to play just this list, and I'm just going to focus on flying. And then to focus on flying, we can just do these drills so I know how to get my guns on target, so that when I do come to the game store, I have a good time. Because it's really frustrating. Just go to the game store, you're there, you want to have fun, you want to hang out, you want to play a good game of Armada, and you're like, man, I messed up this one movement, and because of how punishing the game is to play, you just don't do anything the rest of the game, and you wasted your time having fun. So it's annoying to do, and it feels like working out, really, because that's kind of what it is. But if you're willing to put in that extra time to do it, so that you can have fun when you're at the game store, so you don't have so much mental load, and you just relax and have a good time and just throw some dice, and your guns are going to be on target, it's a good thing to try.
And hey, I mean, I want to point out, no matter how powerful a list you're playing, how potent it is, how far it's gone in worlds, if you do not know how to play it, you are not going to do well. I mean, practice is really more important than people give it credit for, and I know it's hard to find time to practice Armada, because games do take some time.
They do take some time.
Well, I want to say thank you for being on the show tonight. I do have a few things that I need to get to for my X-Wing viewers, but thank you so much for sharing your insight and your background with us. I don't know if you're going to be on the stream on Thursday or not. We'll figure out who's going to be there, but we will be
Yeah,
doing.
we'll have to see because Garrett and I are probably, well, we're likely to go to another tournament on Saturday up in Ohio.
And
So
you
we're probably
probably
going
don't want to be on the stream then revealing your secrets.
to.
Yeah.
I don't really mind. I'm playing something that's so crazy it's gonna get people anyways, regardless. But Garrett and I might play tomorrow, which might means I might have to deal with Superstar Destroyer, which I'm not looking forward to. So we might have Garrett.
Well,
Stone.
I may not be on the stream. I may have somebody else on the stream just to keep things interesting. I do like to mix things up. So we will see how we get things going. But usually the stream will start about 6:30 Eastern time. So if you check out the 13th Fleet on Twitch, and then if you miss the live stream, we will of course have the recording posted on YouTube. So thanks again, Reuben.
No problem, man. Have a good night.
Take care.
See
Okay, so yeah, getting to X-Wing, because that was a lot of Armada for you, and I hope you got some useful information out of that. Again, as a new player, learning the game is rough. It is a very steep learning curve, but on the other hand, he also mentioned that the meta progresses slower than in some other games. So, I'm coming from a HeroClix background where a new set drops every 3 months, and it completely changes what you're looking at, and so you've got to do a lot of studying and staying on top of things, whereas this gives you more time to practice your lists, more time to pick up what you need to play. So hopefully that was some insight that you can use. Moving on to X-Wing, this past week, I can't remember who I had on the stream. That is so rude of me, but we will be streaming again tomorrow night at 6:30. Should be getting started at 6:30. Usually those games will be short enough to encompass in one sitting there. Not sure who I'm going to have on there. I do know that I am personally going to be practicing for the tournament at Greater Gaming on Saturday. Doors open at 11 a.m. There is going to be, for the top 4 token boxes, which I'm not familiar with those, so I'm going to have to see what those look like. I'm kind of excited. Then again, being as new as I am to the game, I don't know that I'm actually going to be good enough to make it. But in the last tournament, I did feel like I was improving with my list. I am still going to be running the Decimator, and I will be running some form of Vader. I haven't decided yet if I want to change from the Actions Vader to the Battle of Yavin Vader, who is definitely a lot more aggressive, can pump out some more damage, but then also requires his locks in order to do that. I'm just going to have to wait and see what's going on there. One thing, but I do want to point out that we do have. I can point to the. Never mind. This is at Greater Gaming, and that's spelled GR8R Gaming. So if you want to look it up online, get details, go to Roll Better and sign up for the event if you want to join in. It is definitely going to be something worth playing. And hopefully I'm actually planning on streaming from the event, so Saturday you may get some live streams that you may not have expected there, and get to see some X-Wing action from players who are probably better than I am. But with that, we're going to call it a night here, a little bit short. I don't, like I said, don't have a lot to go on with X-Wing, because obviously I haven't learned my lesson from this past week on X-Wing. I don't think I actually got to fly is the problem. I was actually sitting down running the stream rather than actually playing, so I can't share with you lessons learned from my play because, well, I didn't have any play. So I am going to go ahead and say goodnight to you. We will be back next week at 9 p.m. Hopefully I'll be able to get a guest on board. It looks like we are, getting a little bit better with the technology. So eventually we're going to have an all-star show. So I'm glad for those of you who are joining us early. And I hope that you will spread the word with your friends. Go to the Facebook page, the 13th Fleet. Go to the Twitch channel and subscribe. Go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. And these things will help us get the channel going. And hopefully get me some more guests on here, getting different perspectives on the game and helping us all be better players. So, good night, everybody.